Hey everyone, in this video we're going to show you step by step how to build your own FPV quadcopter. You could build your own from scratch, but just to keep things simple, because I just want to show you the basic concepts of what it takes to build a quadcopter. Keep things simple, we're just going to use this Emax Nighthawk 250. This is the Pro Kit. The difference between the Pro Kit and the glass fiber and carbon fiber mix is that the Pro Kit comes with the bigger motors, the 23 kV motors instead of the 2280. You get the 60-30 carbon fiber props instead of the 50-30, which is just a little bit longer. It comes with the CC3D flight controller, but we're going to change this out for a Naze32. I just like the Naze32 better. I think it's a better value. You get more options, and I think it flies better. And this one, the frame is going to be the full carbon fiber instead of the glass fiber carbon fiber mix. And this kit comes with the 12 amp BL Heli ESCs. Well, it's supposed to be BL Heli, but the package says Simon. But we're going to hook it up to the computer and check to see what's actually flashed on this firmware. So let's go through the content of the kit. You get the 4 12 amp ESCs. You get the CC3D flight controller, but we're going to be changing this out for the Naze32. You can still use the CC3D. It's just I recommend the Naze32. You get the 60-30 carbon fiber props. 60-30 means the 60 part is the length of the propeller, which is 6 inches, and 30 is the pitch. So if you go with a 60-40, a 40 would have a more angled pitch than 30. It creates more thrust, but it also uses more battery. You get 4 of these 2204 2300 kV motors. And it comes with the full carbon fiber frame. This comes with a bag of hardware. You got all your standoffs, all your screws, the dampeners for the camera mounting, and you have all your carbon fiber body parts. And it also comes with instructions. Okay, so in addition to the Emax kit, you're going to need some other parts to make your quadcopter fly. The first one would be a transmitter. I would suggest getting a transmitter that has at least 6 channels. You can use one that has 4, but with the 4 you're not going to be able to set up flight modes or set up a discovery buzzer or anything like that. I'm just going to be using a transmitter that I already have, and that's the Taranis X9D. This one's a little bit pricey, but this thing can do pretty much anything you want it to do. It's got dials everywhere. You could program it to talk to you and set up telemetry and everything. The next thing you're going to need is a receiver for your transmitter. I'll be using the FreeSky D4R2. I really like this transmitter because it's so small and it weighs almost nothing, and it supports telemetry and CPPM. So what telemetry does, it's basically going to tell you the RSSI, which is the radio strength signal indicator, which is basically, it is going to tell you how strong your signal is. So if you fly too far out, you can program your Taranis to give you a warning when your signal is low, and you can also set it up to display each individual cell in your battery to display on your Taranis. Also, the CPPM, what CPPM does is basically when you connect your transmitter or your receiver to your flight controller, normally you would have to connect all 4 channels. So you would have four wires coming out of the receiver. What CPPM does, it lets you just use one channel, channel 1, and it'll output 8 channels to your flight controller. We'll go into all that later when we get into the programming part. So the next thing you're going to need is a battery. The ESCs that we're using, they support 2 to 3 cells. So this one is a 3 cell. And I think any battery that's 3 cell within 1000 to, I'd say, 1800 milliamps would be fine. I'll be using these Turnigy Nanotech 1300 milliamp batteries. These are the 45 to 90C discharge. So these will be powerful enough for any kind of flying you're going to be doing. And I like these because they're really cheap. They're only about, I think, $14 or something on Amazon. So, or I mean, Hobby King. And for the FPV part, I'm going to be using this little cheap camera I found on Amazon. I usually use the Sony cameras, which cost about $55, but I've broken a couple of them already. So we're going to see if this cheaper camera will work just as well as the expensive Sony cameras. For the video transmitter, I'm going to be using a Immersion RC 5.8 gigahertz 600 milliwatt transmitter. I've used a lot of transmitters, and these have been consistently the best ones that I've used. They give me the best range and the cleanest signal. And the transmitters, they come with these cheap plastic antennas, which work fine if you're on a budget, but I would highly recommend upgrading to the SpiralNet Immersion RC antennas. They're going to give you a much cleaner picture and better range also. And for the monitor part, I'll be using my Fat Shark Dominator V2s. I really like these goggles. They give you a really clean picture, and the field of view I think is 32 degrees, which is pretty good. And these come with a built-in DVR. So if you put in a memory card right here, you can record exactly what you see through the monitor, which is pretty cool. So the Emax kit comes with a CC3D flight controller. You can still use this board, but I highly recommend using a Naze32 board, and this is what we'll be using. This is a Naze32 Acro. The difference between the Acro board and the full board is that the Acro doesn't have the magnetometer and the barometer built in. I think the only reason you would need the full board is if you were trying to put GPS on it or something, but for FPV racing, I think the Acro board is perfectly suited. And I really like these over the CC3D because you can hook up a buzzer to it. So the buzzer, you can use it as a discovery buzzer or a low battery buzzer. So in base flight or clean flight, you can tell it what voltage, if your battery drops below a certain voltage, for it to start beeping, or you can set it up as a discovery buzzer. So when you hit a switch on your controller, it'll start beeping, and that's very helpful when you lose your quad in like tall grass or somewhere crazy where it's hard to find. And this thing's saved my butt so many times. And also it supports telemetry. So this is the board we'll be using in the build instead of the CC3D. Okay, here's a quick overview of how we're going to hook up all the electronic parts on our quadcopter. Everything's going to be connected to the LiPo battery right here. You got positive and negative. I didn't show you the distribution board, but I'm going to show you, well, this diagram basically shows you how you connect everything up. So for the ESCs, you're basically just going to take all the positives and connect them up in parallel to the positive, and then on the negative part, same thing, negative from the battery to all the negatives on the ESCs. And then for the to power the Naze, we're going to be using the BEC, the battery eliminator circuitry from ESC1 right here to power the Naze. So on ESC1, you're going to take all three of the connectors, the signal, power, and ground, and connect it up to channel 1 on the Naze, power, and ground. And then for ESCs 2, 3, and 4, you're going to take the power and ground off the wires, and you're only going to use the signal wires. So 2 is going to go here, 2, 3, and 4. And for the motors, they're just going to connect all the ESCs. And for motor 1, it's going to be clockwise, motor 2 counterclockwise, 3 counterclockwise, and 4 clockwise. And the motors have to be spinning in this direction for the corresponding ESCs. If you have one of these that are spinning counterclockwise and this one clockwise, this one counterclockwise, you can't just go in here and switch the signal leads to make them spin correctly. If your motors aren't spinning correctly, just take any two of the 3 motor wires and just flip them around, and that'll make your motor spin the other way. And then for the receiver, we're going to be using the D4R2 in CPPM mode. So you're just going to use the signal, or the signal wire from channel 1, and it'll be the top rows if you're looking at the receiver flat. It'll be the top row of pins. So the first one is the signal, and you're going to connect it up to the signal on the channel 1 of the Naze. The power right here will go to the power, and then the ground will go to this pin right here. And then we're also going to be setting up a buzzer for the discovery buzzer and low voltage warning. So you basically just hook up the positive from the buzzer to the positive of the Naze32, and the ground here to the ground. And also we're going to be using we're going to be connecting the battery to the Naze on the VBATT, which basically lets you monitor your battery voltage. So in clean flight or base flight, you can set your voltage to a certain level, and if the battery drops below that, the buzzer will start beeping. So that's what you basically need for your quadcopter. And if you want to add FPV on your quadcopter, you would add this section right here. So to add FPV, we're just going to be using a Immersion RC 600 milliwatt transmitter connected to a regular security camera for the FPV flying. So you basically just connect the power up to the battery on the video transmitter, and you're going to splice the power to the power on the camera, ground here, and then on the video, you're going to output the video from the video transmitter to the input signal on the FPV camera. So I'll show you how to do everything in the videos, but this is basically the schematic we're going to be using. So let's get started. So the instructions that come with the frame aren't very clear, so I'm going to show you really quickly how to mount the arms. So you start off with these M3 by 16 screws. Put them on the top. This. And then you put your arms on. And then you use the H5 spacers put in here. Hold the arms in. And then this would go over the bottom part of your frame, like this. And then from here you would just put the the self-locking screws on top of that to hold the bottom part in, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, so I've got the rest of the arms connected on here, and I've mounted my power distribution board on the bottom. And I decided for my build, the best way for the Naze to face is to the right. So that way I have my access to my USB. My receiver pins are going to be facing the front because this is where I'll mount my receiver. And then my ESC pins will come up from under the board, under here. And it's going to come over, will probably come around this way, and then I'll connect it this way. So if you look at the diagram on my website, you'll see for the Naze32, the 4 ESCs are going to go ESC1, ESC2, ESC3, ESC4, right? So originally, or actually, this is the way I'm going to mount my ESCs. I'm going to mount them just like this. This, and then I'll put bullet connectors on the ends over here, and then I'll wire these over here, and then I'll connect it to the motor this way. And then I'm gonna cut down some of these power wires. Okay, so I've got my ESC wires, power wires all shortened and ready to be mounted on the power distribution board here, and I already pre-tinned all the wires here. So next I'm going to pre-tin the pads on the board, and then I'm going to mount or solder the wires onto the board. So start off with a clean tip. So let's see, now I'm going to use this one. It helps if you add a tiny bit of solder onto the tip first, because I think it helps distribute the heat around the board. And when you're heating these, you want to heat the board along with the solder. You don't want to just drip solder onto the board. There. So now that I've got all the boards pre-tinned, I can start soldering the wires onto there. So notice how the solder looks when it's on the when it's finished soldering. It's nice and shiny. It's not bumpy. If you have a bumpy solder joint, that means it's cold, and it might fall apart while you're flying. There you have it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to solder the header pins onto the Naze board. So the way I'm going to mount it is have the arrow pointing to the right, so I'll have access to my USB. My receiver pins will be over here. My VBATT and buzzer will be on this side. And I'm going to put my header pins, the 90-degree pins, facing inside. So they're going to go like this, and then all my receiver pins I'll shorten all these, and then they're just gonna go like that. And then I'm gonna put my VBATT and discovery buzzer this way, and then I'll have the little wire running from under the board, and I'll come up and mount them this way. I like to put my pins like this, pointing the inside, because I feel like it cleans up the board a lot, rather than if I have them like this poking out, then they're kind of sticking out this way, especially once you start connecting these the servo connectors. They're going to stick out of your frame right here. So I like to have them on the inside this way. It's a little more cumbersome to do, but I think it's worth it. So let's get started with soldering. So when I solder, I like to put a little, I like to connect the header pins on a little connector, so that way I'll see how much, that way I'll know I'll have enough clearance after I solder it up. Because if I didn't and I soldered it flush like that, I don't know if you can see that, but there's not a whole lot of clearance under here for me to put the pin. So if I already have the thing connected, I'll know exactly how much clearance I'll need. So I'm going to do the same thing with this one too. But let's start with this big one. And then start soldering. So for the Naze, when I'm soldering smaller things like this, I usually like to use around 600 to 650 degrees. I think it's a good good compromise between heat and you know, just a nice clean solder joint. So I'll solder the first one, see if it looks okay. Looks pretty good. And I'm gonna do the rest. There you go. Done. Nice and clean. Now we're gonna do the discovery buzzer and the VBATT. So the VBATT is gonna be the top one, and the buzzer is gonna be the second one. So one thing to to note on the Naze board, when you're connecting anything with power, the negative is always going to be on the outside of the board. So all these are negative. Same thing with the pin headers, all these are negative. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing this. So for this, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to connect it up to a connector. So that way I know I'll have enough clearance when I solder it up. I'm going to put it on this one. So I'll make sure I have it on the VBATT and the buzzer, which is on the first one and the second one. Just like that. And we are done. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start connecting our ESC signals to our Naze. So we're gonna use the power from ESC1, which would be this one, because it goes like this. This is the front of the quad. Oops. So this is the front of the quad. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I found helps is if you mark your wires. I don't know if you can see, but I put little marks on the ESC wires just to let me know which one is which, because once you start shortening these and cutting them down, it gets a little confusing when you start wiring it back up. So just put a little mark. I put 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I also do it on the other side too, because I'm going to be cutting these down. I don't know if you can see that right there. There's little marks in there. Okay, so the way we're going to do it is I'm going to, well, instead of doing it this way and cutting them here, because if I cut them here, I'll have to try to solder all these tiny little pins, and it's a pain in the butt. So instead of doing that, I'm going to keep these ends as is, and I'm just gonna cut the wires down here and then splice them, solder them together. Okay, so the first one, number 1, we're gonna be using the power for the ESC, from the ESC to power the Naze. So number 1, this one, I'm gonna keep intact because we're gonna use the ground and the power line for the Naze. So we're going to keep that one intact, and the rest I'm going to remove the power and the ground from the signal. So I'm just going to do like that for all of them. Just like that, and then on this side and pull through a little bit. So I'm going to split it again here, and then I'm just going to cut this off and make sure. Okay, this is ESC3, so this one is coming, or actually this one is 4, so this one's coming off for sure. Just making sure I'm not cutting ESC1. So I'm just going to cut this as close to the ESC as I can. Cut one here, and then I can just pull this one through. And won't be needing this. And then what I like to do is just cut one of these, either the power or the ground, just a little bit shorter, just to make sure they won't touch. And then I'll put a little bit of heat shrink on it just to keep them together. So I'll cut that a little bit, and I'll just remove a tiny little section. And then I'll just do the same for all the rest of them. So what I have here is I have my Naze all wired up, ready for shortening the wires. So basically the first pin right here is ESC1, and that's where I'm using the power from the ESC to power the Naze. And then this little harness right here is basically just this is wire, or the signal for ESC2, and the next one is ESC3, and the last one is ESC4. So I just took the power off the ESC, and I just made a little harness, and they're just going to go right here. So 2 is going to go into pin 2, 3, and 4 right here. So it's just going to go like that. It just makes it easier when you're connecting things. And then the number 1 is going to go this way. Make sure because this the 90-degree header is backwards, you have to make sure the signal wires are hooked up to the bottom of this 90-degree harness. So connect it like that, and then what I'm going to do is on the other side I'm going to pull all the wires through, and then that's when I'll do the shortening of the wires. Just like that, and then from here, this is where I'll do all the shortening. Example for this ESC, I'll just cut the wire here, and then I'll just splice them together like that, and then I'll put a little piece of heat shrink over that to cover it up. And that's basically it. And then I'll just do the same for all the other ones, and the ESC one, you're just going to cut this and then splice the 3 wires together. So we've got the everything wired up. Next we're going to connect the VBATT for the Naze. The Naze is going to help you, or is going to let you monitor your battery voltage, and then later on we'll just connect the discovery buzzer up to here, so when your battery drops too low, your buzzer will start beeping. So what I did was just connected a little 2-pin connector on the VBATT, and I ran it under the Naze, and it's just going to come up here, and then we're just going to solder it onto this this little pad right here. And I've already pre-tinned everything, so it's ready to be soldered right now. Okay, so next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna connect the battery cable to the power distribution board. So basically, you're just gonna find a positive and a negative and connect it that way. So negative is gonna go to a negative pad, positive to a positive pad. But before we solder it, I'm gonna put a little wire mesh around the cable. It'll help protect it from the sharp edges on the carbon fiber. So the way I do it is, before I start doing the mesh, I like to get a little lighter and just kind of burn the edges just a tiny bit to help it from fraying, because these things can get pretty crazy quickly. That's it. And then I'll just kind of feed this through. Feed it through like that. And then you can hold one end like this. Push this through. Grab this end, let go. And then just keep doing that till you have it all the way through, just like that. Like that. And then the edges are gonna get a little tiny bit frayed, but don't worry about that. We're just gonna get a little heat shrink and we'll cover it up. Ugh. Sometimes if the heat shrink is too small, you can just get some pliers, push it through, and kind of open it up just a little bit, and you have a bigger opening. Like that. Oops. I want the bigger end at the XT60. Like that. So let's see, I'm actually going to mount it onto the power distribution board before I start heat shrinking these things. Okay, so I've already pre-tinned my wires here, and I already pre-tinned the pad where I'm going to put it. And I'm going to turn up my soldering iron to about 750 degrees. So this is how we're going to do it. So same thing when you solder these, you don't want to, after the solder is melted, you don't want to move it around too much. So you want to hold it down to where it's pretty stable, and then you just apply some pressure. It helps if you have a little solder on there. There you go. Okay, so now you can see the solder joints are nice and shiny. That means it's a good solder joint. Yeah, once again, you don't want a fuzzy looking dull solder joint, because that means it's a cold joint, and that's when you get problems of them falling off. So the next thing I'm going to do is secure my mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little dab of hot glue right in there just to help keep this thing in place. Just a little bit, and then a little bit over here too. You gotta work fast because the stuff dries pretty quickly. Just a little bit like that. Cut it off, push it in. Like that. And then you just apply heat and shrink these up, and your power is done. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to mount the motors onto the quad. This Emax kit comes with clockwise and counterclockwise motors. The reason they do that is because they're kind of self-tightening. So if you have a clockwise motor, which would be number 1 is a clockwise motor, motor's going to spin this way, like this. So if it spins this way, I guess the inertia of the prop is going to kind of counteract the spin. So as it spins, it's going to kind of tighten this knob. So you'll see this nut, it doesn't tighten going the regular way, it tightens going this way. So for this one, you want the black nuts, or the ones that tighten to the left, on the clockwise. And then for the ones that go counterclockwise, number 2 and 3, you want the silver nut. You want the ones, well, because it's going to spin this way, you want the nut to tighten to the right. So it tightens that way, and it opens this way. So as it turns this way, it kind of tightens. So you're just going to go black, silver. You're going to go black, silver, silver, black over here. So I just finished mounting my motors and connecting them up to the ESCs. And I also just soldered on a little 3-pin cable for the receiver. So I basically just soldered on channel 1 to the Naze, because I'm using a D4R2 which supports CPPM. It basically just lets you connect the signal power ground to the signal on number 1, power and ground on the Naze32. So if you're using a receiver that doesn't support CPPM, you would have to connect it like this. You would have to go ground power signal to ground power signal on the number 1, and then number 2 on the receiver would go to number 2, 3, and 4 would connect to 4 on the other side of the Naze. So that's the advantage of using a receiver that supports CPPM. It lets you just use channel 1 and it still outputs 8 channels on the Naze. So that's pretty much it for our physical build on our quad. Check the next video. I'll show you how to set up your receiver, program your transmitter, set up your Naze, and connect the camera and the video transmitter for the FPV part. So thanks for watching.